Well, hey there, friends. How's everybody doing today? I would guess that everybody out there is affected in some way by this lockdown situation, and I wanted to talk about that for a moment. And the question I wanted to ask is it time to open up the country and go back to business? I realize and totally understand that people have very strong opinions on this. Now, in the past videos I've made, I've talked about how I believe that shutting down for a period of time was the right decision. And I still do believe that. Only for the fact that the hospitals would be overwhelmed otherwise. And nobody wants their loved ones being thrown in a trailer. But, that said, people do have a constitutional right to go about their business. And so I wanted to talk about this for a moment. Now, my wife and I have become quite impatient. Even going camping, or going out to the woods, or to a park, is not allowed in a lot of places. Now, just a quick background. I live in Washington State. We had some of the first cases that were documented. Now they're saying it was in California before that. But point being, we've had several cases in Seattle and throughout the state. We were the first state to go on lockdown. Our cases are still at around 700 of deaths anyway. And we've actually done a fair job. In my state, we don't have any laws against going to the parks or going hiking or going out in groups. In other words, we are voluntarily, for the most part, following the recommendations. Because of that, if I go out with a group of friends or go somewhere, I'm not going to get a $1,000 ticket. Now, when I started looking at some of the fines for some of the other states and the way that different states are going about this, that's when I started to understand the viewpoint of other people who said, this is ridiculous, I shouldn't get fined. Back when I was talking about it, at that point there were no fines. It was just, people should stay home. I completely agree that it's ridiculous that a person should be charged with going paddleboarding by themselves because the beach is closed. Or there are several stories that can just anger you if you look at them. It makes it feel like we are under a constitutional crisis and a full-on attack on our rights as Americans. When you expand this to the whole world, and you realize this is happening everywhere, it becomes even more complicated to try to say, well, it's the U.S. or a group trying to quash our rights or declare martial law, which is what a lot of people are afraid of. It's not likely that martial law will be declared, but since it's a worldwide issue, we are only privy to the information we're given. The information we see through the media, YouTube, or wherever else. I have scoured the internet over the last 3 months. I've been obsessed about this thing since day one, back in January when I found out. And because of that, the information has continually changed. And the new information that I have now has changed my opinion on the situation. And I'm going to explain how I feel about this. First off, opinions change over time. If you're not willing to shift and say, oh, this is maybe the best choice or this isn't the best choice, sticking to your guns in a situation like this is foolish. Because as the info changes, we get new numbers, new statistics. At the beginning, we thought maybe 4% of people could have died from this. Now they're saying maybe it's only 0.5%. Because they tested all these people in California and found that a lot more people had been infected than they thought. However, others say, well, this is just a small sampling of people who volunteered through Facebook. The question is, what about the more vulnerable communities? And this is a big issue. Well, first off, we're getting mixed messages from leadership. I'm not going to get into politics here. I say that every time, but it's important because if you don't acknowledge what the politicians are saying, then you can't acknowledge how the people are reacting. And at the beginning, the president was saying basically he won't wear a mask, but it's recommended, things like that. And it's not about whether he is or isn't. It's about mixed messages from him and other people. And on top of this, we have an issue where he tweeted the other day, liberate Alabama, or liberate all these states, liberate Minnesota. And then the state of Georgia decided to open. And then he tweeted that he disagrees with the state of Georgia opening. Now I want to go back and reiterate this. It was the president saying that people should have the freedom to open their states. Georgia said they were going to open their state, and then the president tweets he doesn't recommend it or he doesn't agree with it. This is the confusion that we're dealing with leadership And not just him, it's the Democrats, the Republicans, everybody is completely off their rocker about this because there's political factors involved, it's an election year, and that makes it even more complicated. So I don't want to go too far off track here. I needed to address that issue because it's a major factor in the way people are protesting in the streets and saying they want their states opened. So my wife and I were talking about this morning, and I was saying, I have my own history of lung problems in my family. My dad died young. His dad died young. I've worried about whether if I got sick, I might, not make it. Not likely. I probably would. But just a thought if I did. And I think the other side of this is people say, well, that's your problem. Stay home if you think that you're vulnerable. The problem is a lot of people are vulnerable, and I care about people. I care about my mom getting sick. She doesn't even care about it. She thinks it's just overblown, and maybe she's right. But I still want to protect those I love. So what I'd like to say is most people support the social distancing protocol, okay? And possibly we can open up businesses and still use our social distancing guidelines. I know a lot of people don't want to wear a mask because they're stubborn and they think it's stupid. It's not to protect you as much as other people. Now, we work as a team or we all fail. And I'm not just talking about the United States. I'm talking about the world. If every nation is out to get one another during this time of crisis, which is what's happening, there's a lot going on behind the scenes that they're not talking about because there's bigger news. But a lot of hacking into our healthcare system, hacking into health groups to try to figure out any information they could steal about vaccines or anything else. And on top of that, I'm sure that the infrastructure is very vulnerable right now. And I'm not going to get into what could happen because it's just a what if. But let's just say that at the time when humans are most vulnerable, that's when other countries are going to try to take advantage. China, Russia, anybody, any country out there who has a vested interest in being a superpower will use this against us. And that means they will be the ones spreading fake news through media, through social media, through Facebook, posting articles trying to divide Americans. And I want to make this clear. There are people out there in other countries whose only interest, groups, huge groups, their only interest is to, I believe one of them was Operation Infection with a K, but it's a Russian group. Their only goal is to spread dissent among Americans and division between us. So our country falters and falls apart. So while everybody is out there saying, the Democrats did this and the Republicans did that, you got to realize it's leadership that's failing in general. I don't want to get into that, but I always do because it's such a huge issue. Canada is dealing with this a completely different way than the United States. Many less cases. I mean, does that mean that they handled it better? Does that mean that they just have lesser of a population? Are they less vulnerable because of where they are? I don't know. I do know that Seattle is in my state, and that's where a lot of people come from China, and that's probably why we had some of the first cases. But to go back and reiterate that, we've only had 700 deaths, and our state has one of the laxest policies about going out because of the fact that we dealt with it as a team. So we have a very delicate economy. When people talk about this thing destroying our economy, I would like to say that if a virus, if locking down for a few months destroys an entire economy, there was something going on behind the scenes already. And the Lehman Brothers and AIG and all the groups that failed us in 2008 that were bailed out and paid millions in bonuses to their, top CEOs, there's a lot of these are still in business, and they're the same companies who are barely hanging on by a thread. Before this happened, Boeing was already suffering heavily. A lot of American companies were. And when this happened, they are the ones that took full advantage of it. They are the ones who went out and got the loans. Even my sister-in-law, she works for Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, and her husband's the manager, and they got $20 million in loans. But they have a $92 million fund. They were told to give the money back, and this is the kind of chaos that the larger companies are able to profit off of this, and the small guys just get screwed. Why can't we change this? Well, because the system is designed that way. So, I guess I should get to my point here. it's not just about getting sick with this virus. The virus itself, as far as getting a cold or getting it over with, it's the long-term psychological effects that it may cause. It may enter the brainstem or through they're not sure exactly how this works, but they believe that it may go to the brain through the sinuses, and that some of the effects might be due to neurologic effects rather than being a lung problem, and kind of a combination of the two. And I'll be honest, that scares the shit out of me. It really does, you know? But I'm not fearful. It's not like a fear I'm afraid of. It's just something I would avoid. It's kind of like walk a little bit off the cliff instead of right on the edge, right? I mean, you can still fall, but... So, here's where I've kind of changed my opinion on this. The latest research has shown that antibodies may not protect you against getting reinfected. There was one lady, I believe in Italy or Spain, who tested positive for the coronavirus 67 days after she had been originally declared infected. 2 months, people. That means that a person who can still be possibly contagious for 2 months, and on top of that, they might be able to catch it again. And I'm not a big fan of vaccines. Look, I've had this debate with people before, but I believe in certain vaccines. But I don't go out and get flu shots or anything. And if a vaccine for this came along, I would probably not get it, because I'm very wary of any new vaccine. This would be like the first coronavirus vaccine. I mean, like I said, I just read that book. It was like 500 pages. It was about viruses, and there's so many different kinds out there. And it's so easy for us to be divided over where it comes from, whether it's made in a lab, whether it was a planned event. But what if it wasn't? Let's just say it came from nature, and here we are facing it. What is the best method? Should we open up our country today completely and just let people do what they choose? Let it work through the system, overwhelm the system, and then get on with our lives? And a lot of people say yes. I've heard a lot of people say, I think it was the governor of Texas who said, there are some things that are more important than living or life. I was just like, okay, if that's how you feel, just like I've heard on the media, old people would sacrifice themselves for the economy. I think, fine, if that's what people value. I'm only an individual. But to me, people are what matter. People matter much more than money. There's enough food out there. We're dumping milk down the drain, for God's sake. But, so anyway, as I said before, my family history, I have a little bit of worry there, but not much. I have really good lungs, and I'm a pretty healthy person. I have a good immune system. So here's the thing. We have faced worse than this. People like to compare this to car accidents or, anything else, other diseases, the flu, whatnot. Let me just say that we created seatbelts for a reason, okay? And there are still people that will argue that seatbelts are more dangerous than no seatbelt. Even though statistically, seatbelts save more lives than they take, right? This is the same argument I feel about trying to prevent a virus or, have certain restrictions and guidelines. It's not that, the old cure is worse than the illness thing. I don't think that really is legitimate in this case, because the frontline workers, our first responders, are the ones that have to face this. The rest of us just have to go to work or stay at home, right? So is it really that bad? And for some people it is. And that's really where I wanted to go with this. For the average person who does okay and still gets a check and maybe gets unemployment, they're doing fine. But what about the people who are already unemployed when this started? What about the people who live, in really poor neighborhoods where they don't even have local grocery stores or anywhere to get food? It's really easy for us to be selfish, but we do have a choice here. We can save lives. And I'm not saying I know what the best route to that is. But I do believe that each individual state is making the best choice, hopefully, for its own people. I wouldn't say that they are, but I hope that they are. And I guess it comes down to, what is a society? When people talk about saving the nation, I often ask, what exactly are we saving? Is it this number on a piece of paper that makes us great? Or is it the lives of the individuals that have one chance to live this life? And I guess I should note there, that's an opinion that a majority of Americans do not share, the opinion that you get one chance at this. And I hate to bring in religion, but when people believe in heaven and they believe there's an afterlife, they are more willing to die for their causes, and they are more willing to say, well, this is God's plan. I don't buy that shit. I want to live a long, healthy life. I don't want to die for my country. I don't believe that. I don't believe in that. I feel bad for people who get sucked into it. 18-year-old kids who go off to fight in Afghanistan and get shot to death over what? What have we gained? What did we gain in, Vietnam, where my dad got Agent Orange, which probably killed him? We have one chance here. We have choices to make. And I think that this is a battle between the value of life and the value of personal freedom. And I would just like to say that if your idea of personal freedom may cost another person their life, then you are infringing on their rights and their freedoms. And this isn't always the case, but it's an important thing to consider. So what do we do? I'd like to hear your opinions without some combative, argumentative, oh, Carpo, you just this and you liberals, really, just move past that shit. Talk about the subjects at hand and tell me what you think. I'd like to know what state you live in, if you want to share that, and what your governor is doing and whether you think it's the right approach. This is difficult to gauge because since we locked down early, we haven't had a lot of deaths. We haven't faced bodies in the streets. And we don't even know now if that would be the case. And because of this information coming out about how it might be 30 times less bad, not as bad as we thought, it makes you wonder still, if all of the people that we really trust, doctors and the scientists, virologists, agree that it's the best policy for the most part. If we disagree with that, then we have to base it on what somebody else is saying. And if we're basing it on what somebody else is saying, then we have to ask ourselves what they have to gain from their choice or their method, let's say. If a person wants to just open up the economy because their state's election is coming up and they are worried their constituents will be mad at them, they're not doing it to protect the people. They're doing it for the re-election. And, there are a lot of problems to work out, and I'm hoping that we come to terms with this. I don't see any solutions. I just see, more questions. I actually wrote a paper today. It was another little 7-page paper called The Psychedelic Experience. And it was my only conclusion that I could come to was the only thing that's really helped me see the light were my psychedelic experiences. But, of course, that can go both ways. I'll get into that in another video. I think I'm going to have to read it on video because I have all these papers that I don't want to write or read on a microphone because it feels more comfortable to talk to the camera. I feel like I'm talking to y'all and I'm with you. So, as always, thanks for listening. I do appreciate your opinions. Even the ones people I argue with, it's just a matter of trying to get to the bottom of things. As long as it doesn't become a personal attack, I know how that goes. We're all having a little bit of trouble right now. Everybody's brain's a little bit fucked up, all right? We're doing the best we can. But just remember, if we were sitting in a room together talking about these things and smoking a joint, you can let all the little things go. What matters is that we figure out what works for us, and it's a hard time to do it. Peace.